At our last meeting a week ago, the previous Friday, I ended by beginning to share the story I had written about my work with a client, Mark. I brought it up and started reading it because of all the stories I have, that one seems very illustrative of some challenges that are related to having trouble making an identity properly. And that's the developmental era that I was talking about, identity versus role confusion. So this is a client whose identity was killing him. If you'll remember, for those of you who have seen the preceding episode, he came in referred to me by a neurosurgeon who had wanted to work with him about a terrible, ongoing, chronic, bad back set of back pains. But the surgeon had concluded that this was a psychosomatic problem, and it was really his body reacting to some unknown stress of probably a psychological nature, and referred him to me. And he came in very unhappy and very belligerent because he didn't believe the referral, and I had to work with him with kindness and some gentleness to reframe what was being said to him. And I ended up towards the end of the session asking him what the purpose of his life was, because he was an exceptionally wealthy man. And he said the purpose of his life was to go on pyramiding his net worth. And I think I left you cliffhanging by saying at that point, I was very direct with him. I said, I do not believe that the purpose of your life is for you to continue pyramiding your net worth. And he had gotten belligerent back and said, well, if you're so smart, what is the purpose of my life? And I said, I didn't know. Only he knew, but maybe I could help him discover it. And we set fees and everything. And finally, I can pick up my narrative. Mark did agree to return. I was even surprised that he agreed to return. I thought he'd say, fuck you and leave. I gave him the usual paperwork that always needs to be completed. And before he filled his pages out and left, we made another appointment. Starting that second visit and going onward, I began to learn much more about him. My new client was the only child of immigrant Italian parents. Mother and father had met and married each other in an Italy that was poverty stricken after World War II. A distant relative who had made his way to the United States in the years immediately before the opening of the war had traced them down and had offered to sponsor the couple for entry into the United States. And the couple was able to do so. Unfortunately, the relative was not an affluent man. He could provide only very limited financial help to them. Mother became pregnant and gave birth to Mark soon after their arrival as residents of New York's Little Italy. Mark's parents had little facility with language and never did manage to become very fluent in English. This limited his father's employment opportunities. In point of fact, father made only a meager living, selling New York souvenir trinkets to tourists from a pushcart he would park alongside the curb in a more fashionable neighborhood. But in spite of his troubles and his pinched existence, the man remained cheerful and optimistic. In one of his sessions with me, Mark remembered a time when he was about 3 and was being watched over by his father. Father made sure his son was keeping close to him by the side of the push cart. And in Italian words directed at Mark, Father created a destiny for his son. Marcus, this is the land of opportunity. Yes, the streets can be paved with gold. You are so smart. You learn everything so quickly. You already speak English. You are going to be something. You will learn to make much, much money. You will conquer. You will be rich. And you will take good care of your mother and your father when we are old. And so it went. The script of his life had already been laid down for Mark. Mark was indeed quite intellectually brilliant. He entered the neighborhood New York Public Elementary School and was an exemplary student, much beloved by many of his teachers. He was at or near the top of his class in every one of his subjects. and he had no difficulty securing admission to the Bronx High School of Science, where once more he excelled in everything. His accomplishments in high school then led to a full scholarship at Harvard University, where he majored in business, economics, and accounting. Following graduation, the next to last link in his journey was forged, a scholarship to a master's program at the London School of Economics. When education there had been completed, Mark was heavily recruited by several Wall Street firms and returned back to the United States in triumph and to the city of his origin. He had secured an entry level six-figure income his first year out of school. When I met him, he was still flush with the consequences of his meteoric trajectory of ever rising personal income, fueled by the speculative frenzies of the 1990s. Of course, along the way, since the start of his career, Mark had fulfilled the rest of the destiny assigned to him. At the time of our conversations, his elderly parents were fashionably ensconced in a Park Avenue penthouse apartment with a full time maid and a full time chauffeur to take them around in their Mercedes. For several sessions, I had said little to Mark as I accompanied him in his retracing the story of his life. I asked some questions. I made a few tentative comments. I encouraged him to remember and to express himself. But what I was hearing helped me to ready myself to make what I hope might be some transformative intervention into his views about how his life should be lived. At last, I spoke in a way that could possibly prepare for change. Mark, I want to say some things to you that have come to my mind as I've listened the past 3 weeks. I don't know if I've ever discussed this with you, but I spend time not only here in my office, but I also teach grad students who are preparing to enter my field. One of the courses I love teaching is one on lifespan development. Listening to you has reminded me how much I admire one of my most learned elder colleagues in the field of developmental psychology, a man named Eric Erikson, who studied many years ago with Freud's daughter Anna. Erikson is particularly interested in the formation of life scripts, how we develop a plan for ourselves during adolescence and early adulthood, and then find the wherewithal to commit ourselves to taking up a place in the world, engaging our capabilities to build an adult life in a way that implements the plan we have put together. Erickson is very critical of our society. He observes that we start pressuring our youth very early in life to make their plan for what they will do and be in adulthood. Very young persons begin to move blindly in the service of their plan through stages of schooling and immediately into some form of adult engagement. That has certainly been true for you. Your father announced your plan when you were 3, and you followed it tenaciously and are still following the template. Erickson notes that the stress caused by too early identity formation makes a lot of trouble for many people. He believes our culture does poorly at the task of addressing the transition to adult properly. He is much more admiring of other cultures, ones in which he called, quote, a moratorium, unquote. A pause is built into the trajectory of life at that vulnerable cusp between late adolescence and early adulthood. In many Eastern societies, as an illustration, and in contrast to our way of doing things, young people leave school when what we call high school is over, go off to a monastery and take a vow of poverty, meditate, and live simply without pressure or need to perform anything. Or they do a period of social service, tending to the needs of the impoverished in their culture. In some other cultures, Israel, for example, there is a mandatory and universal military service for everyone who has turned 18. And for 2 years, there is no more progression towards any destination other than fulfilling one's military obligations. Erickson always appreciated Native American cultures too. And many of them, the young braves on the threshold of adulthood, must leave the settlement and enter the surrounding wilderness completely alone. They must maintain solitude. They must remain apart from everyone for days, weeks, or even months. They must chant. They must dream. They sometimes use hallucinogens. They are to wait there, separate and apart, until they are visited in a dream or in hallucination by a spirit from the other world. That spirit will appear to instruct them about what their future calling as adult males in the collective is to be, and the spirit will announce to them name they were to solidify and sanctify that calling. Only then are they allowed to return to the tribe and take up what will become a new position in the community. Mark, you've never had any initiation or moratorium. Since you were 3, you've been running without any reflection in the direction set for you by your father. I don't believe it fits you anymore, if it ever fit you at all. Now, since you've already told me you can't possibly imagine any alternative life and you want to keep on doing what you've been doing, in spite of the fact that what you put together for yourself may be wrecking your health, I think it's time for you to have a moratorium at last, even if it's a quite belated moratorium. What do you mean? What do you want me to do? Great. I think you ought to take a very long vacation from everything you spend your present days doing. Get the hell out of this life you're leading, at least for a good while. Great. I've been wanting to take the QE2 across the Atlantic to England. I'll get the wife and kids and the nannies together, and we'll take the train after the boat docks and wind up hanging out without a care in our home in France. No, that's only a slight variation on how you always live. I have quite another scenario in mind, one much more radical. Like what? Mark asked. Something like this. First of all, you have to go somewhere all alone, somewhere you've never been. You're going to leave your home, your family, and your friends behind and have no contact with them. The destination must be a place of great solitude. You need a rented home or a cabin proper for you to occupy all by yourself. It should be situated in a place of great serenity, probably along a seashore shore or in a mountain forest. The residence needs to be at least a quarter of a mile from the dwelling of any other human being. You can take a cell phone with you, but you can use it only if there's a health emergency. No calling anyone. No television, no radio. You can't take any magazines or newspapers with you. You can't check what the market is doing. You can't talk to your broker. You can't be in touch with any business associates, or business prospects. I want you to disconnect entirely from the life you're presently living. You can take music with you for listening sometimes when you can't stand the solitude. You can take any novels you might want to read, and that's all. You're going to have to prepare all your meals and eat them by yourself. So you'll probably have to go to the nearest town to replenish food supplies several times. Go into the market and buy what you need, but don't glance at newspapers or magazines, and don't have any conversation with a checkout person or others who might be there. You're to surrender to disconnection from your current life and to as total solitude as possible, so that you might create a space that might allow you to hear your inner voice whispering to you, a voice whispering a dream about a possible different future. Mark was appalled. That sounds horrible. I'd never do anything like that. I spent the next few sessions attempting to persuade Mark to listen to me and to try my proposed experiment. He remained stubbornly obdurate. I love that word, obdurate. I became more and more afraid of what our impasse would result in. That is, it would probably result in his ending his commitment to speaking with me at all. He was going to stop seeing me. I had gotten lost in what was going to be a meaningless and useless power struggle with my own client. How dumb. Then I had an inspiration. Mark, you keep telling me that my suggesting you go off in solitude for a month is ridiculous. And on my side, I keep thinking it would be helpful for you to go. You're certain that it's a foolish recommendation. Clearly, one of us is wrong. I'm not going to argue with you. Yes, I may be wrong, but I don't think so. Are you a betting man? I'm even willing to make a wager on the outcome of such an experiment. By now, you've paid me a few $1,000s for our conversations. So here's the deal. Go do what I've asked you to do and do it as I've instructed. Then come back after 30 days. If nothing's changed, tell me so. You can even remind me how stupid I've been and what a waste of time it's been taking my talking to me. And if that's the case, we'll say goodbye. And I'll write you a check refunding every penny you've given me. But if you do begin to experience something different while you're gone, you'll come back and we'll continue our work together. Once again, Mark responded with attempts to deflect me and with obfuscations. But by the next session, his overabundant competitiveness won the day, and he came in for that subsequent session to take me up on the proposed wager. And my reader should know I doubled it. I told him I would not only give him back everything he'd given me, but I would give him twice that amount back. He had already begun some research on possible destinations and had also put his personal assistant to work helping him to find suitable lodging. Besides, as he told me, his back was killing him. He was desperate and he decided he would follow my lead, crazy as it sounded to him, if there was even a chance doing so might make a difference. Mark was gone through most of the August and on into early September in the year I'd begun working with him. As I remember it, I hardly thought of him while he was gone, lost in attentiveness to whatever else in my life beckoned to me across the days of his absence. But Mark did call me on the eve of his return to ask when I could set up our next appointment together. I told him I looked forward eagerly to hearing the tale that he would share with me. My client appeared, haunted and subdued, as he seated himself across from me. That was a bitch. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I hated it most of the time. I was bored, restless, lonely. I walked in the woods and on the beach for hours all day by myself. I had only fitful sleep, and the experiment didn't work. I didn't hear any damn inner voice. I still don't know what to do with myself any different than what I'm already doing. Well, has anything changed for you since you went through the experience? He hesitated. He answered my question with a question. What's anxiety? What's an anxiety attack? Mark, anxiety is a feeling of dread. Often it's free floating and doesn't seem to be attached to any particular event, threat, or impending circumstance. It can be a mild tension, a mild dread, or even amp up to a full blown panic. Are you feeling anxious now? No, not at the moment. I don't know if I have ever had much anxiety during my life. I've always been on my game, cocksure and energetic. But I have to admit, ever since I came back from the trip, there are moments when a feeling of fear enters me. My heart races, my palms sweat. I don't know what any of it's about. The episodes come on to me when I'm alone, driving, trying to read, or concentrating on something. The dread lasts 2 or 3 minutes and then it's gone again. My intuition was aroused and rising into my consciousness. A strange theme had begun to capture my interest and it came into my possession. Where did you go? I found a small house for rent in the redwood forest on the Point Reyes Peninsula north of San Francisco. I kept to myself. I wandered in the woods, hiking its trails. I spent a lot of time on Drake's Beach, just sitting on the sand, staring out at the waves, or walking on the white sand all alone for miles of empty beach, watching the birds and hearing the sea lions barking. I laughed, not at Mark, but at myself, because I was going to announce the most crazy mysticism suddenly speaking inside of me. I am not a mystic. I am a rational empiricist. Nonetheless, I whisper to myself sometimes about occult connections and supernatural meanings. I'm seeing in some part of the universe. This was one of those occasions. What the hell, I was saying to myself. I'm going to tell him my absurd thoughts. Maybe there is some ineffable order of things we glimpse only occasionally and only feebly. I don't think so. But I did believe that sharing with Mark what was probably mystical nonsense that had risen in my consciousness might provide an important metaphor that could just possibly advance the work that Mark and I needed to do. Quote me. The place you visited was perfect for you. Do you know that the Point Reyes Peninsula has been created by and is the place where the San Andreas Fault empties into the Pacific Ocean? It is one of the most earthquake active spots on the continent. Now I understand your anxiety. I often think of anxious episodes as being very much like labor pains. We are struggling to give birth to what we need to become, but change is often experienced as very dangerous. So we oscillate. We go into bits of labor and we back away again. We keep ourselves unknowing about what we yearn for and what we need to do. So let me change my analogy. The fact that you are now reverberating with a trembling tension gives me great hope. The tectonic plates inside you are shifting, and little tremors are playing through you as what is hidden below struggles to reach the surface. I'm really sorry I didn't have you stay in solitude for a longer period of time. Oh my God, are you going to send me back there? No, that might not be necessary. I believe you may have loosened significantly. I might be able to be the midwife that helps you to give birth to what you need to become without such stringent matters. Mark did not ask for his money back, but decided to keep coming to talk to me. I then turned to a questioning of whether a large array of various life experience had ever been explored by Mark. His identity formation had coalesced so young in life. I was worried he had never had a proper adolescence, questioning what life was all about and experimenting with learning about and engaging with a variety of bodies of knowledge, practical skills, alternative belief systems, and themes about what we've learned as a species from the long history of our ancestors on this planet. As I feared, his store of knowledge was cramped and so limited. He had never listened to classical music. He had read no novels. He knew little about United States history and even less about the history of life anywhere else. He had never been exposed to any discourse on comparative religions. He had no exposure beyond some in high school to either the physical or the life sciences, and he eschewed reading articles on emerging developments in those domains as these appeared in the newspapers or magazines. Mark knew nothing about how people lived in the rainforests of Amazon, the foothills of the Himalayas, nor the outback of Australia. He did not know what the cargo cult in New Guinea was all about. He had never taken a philosophy course. He was not politically curious, settling of being, of course, a knee jerk Republican because that was the party of privilege. He had never had any lengthy social conversations with a black, brown, or Asian person or with anyone from the working class. He had no idea about what might be the difference between iambic pentameter and free verse. He did not go to art galleries or art museums. He did not go to the opera or the ballet. Went to stage plays, but only if he saw them on Broadway or if they were the local roadshow appearance of some Broadway hit. And even so, he would not go to the theater if what was being presented was too, quote, heavy, unquote. How paradoxical. He was a man of formidable intelligence and vast privilege, but aside from his narrow technical training and skills and topics cherished by the financial services industry, he was as uneducated as an impoverished coal miner in Appalachia who had quit school in the sixth grade in order to help out at home and then gone to work in the mines as soon as he could lie about his age and get a job therein. My discovery of the limits of Mark's knowledge stirred an idea about what the next tool I might use to facilitate some forward movement. Mark, I've been thinking about how poor, from my perspective, of course, your first transit through adolescence was. You were too busy to use it well, to challenge authority, to seek a variety of experiences, to experiment with a variety of risks, to take up some hobbies and to abandon others, to try on a variety of different kinds of relationships, to reevaluate what is important and what you believe and value, and then to reevaluate again. Maybe I can help you do some of that now, finally. How am I going to do that? Well, you close by you play on your way here. The next time you come, give yourself some extra time and stop by the extension office and pick up a catalog or call and have them send you one. You don't need to play golf and tweak your back as often as you do. There's really no place you need to be most days of the week. I was thinking that maybe together we can pick some classes, lectures, workshops out of the extension catalog, and that attending something as yet unknown might open you to that dream I still believe is hiding in you. Since you've been to Point Reyes, you seem more accessible and more malleable than you were before you went. I'm hoping that hidden in the extension catalog will be some experience that'll turn out to be quite transformative for you. Mark agreed to show up for his next appointment with an extension catalog in tow, and he kept his word. He had already skimmed some of his pages, and he arrived excited about a possibility he'd seen. I've talked to my wife. We don't do much together, but I thought it'd be fun to take a Chinese cooking class together. I chuckled. I think that's a sweet idea. You've been so consumed with your career. I'm surprised there's not much more tension between you and your wife. She's tolerated a lack of intimacy with you for many, many years. So, yes, having a shared experience of learning something together that would be a lot of fun and give you both pleasure, might be quite useful. And please don't take this as a criticism. But learning Chinese cuisine is not the kind of experience that's likely to be life changing for you. But we'll look and see what else might be beneficial to you as well while you start your Chinese cooking class. During the fall of that academic year, Mark signed up for an art history class and one on European history. To my delight, he found their content quite interesting, and he even met a few people to spend some leisure time with that were outside his small culture of humans, persons embedded in his lifestyle and with his values whom he ordinarily interacted. Soon after the turn of the new year, Mark came in and told me that he had seen a weekend seminar scheduled for the coming semester, that had piqued his interest. It was entitled Contemporary Moral Dilemmas, and it was going to be team taught by a sociologist, a professor who taught public policy, and an activist Catholic priest. It was unclear from the catalog description what the course content was going to be. He asked me what I thought. That sounds appealing. I'd be interested in attending it myself, but unfortunately, I'm scheduled to be out of town that weekend. Mark did go as he had planned. When he had returned, a different Mark entered my office to tell me about the experience that he had shared with his instructors and with about 30 fellow classmates. As I've written, excuse me, let me stop this phone. Where was I? Oh, as I've written elsewhere, I don't believe in a deity, but here was Mark clearly on the threshold of finding his dream and altering his destiny. How the hell did it happen? Quote, we made 4 field trips during the weekend, one each morning and one each afternoon. We went to the projects in South Central Los Angeles, toured the neighborhood and talked to residents of various ages. We went to the barrio in East Los Angeles and did the same. We went to an AIDS hospice in Hollywood, and we went to McLaren Hall and talked to both some of the protective service workers and to the kids who were warehoused there. While I wandered around South Central, I became lost in thoughts and memories. I had pretty much blocked out my early experience with poverty on the Lower East Side, but here I was again. I also saw the residents' fear. I saw the blight. So many commercial properties were boarded up. Merchants had fled years ago. I asked those who lived there about what I was seeing. They told me that business owners did not come and open things there. They felt unsafe. They were robbed or vandalized so often. They feared for their lives, and the residents felt unsafe to go out at night. I asked what they did about buying groceries, going to the pharmacy, or getting clothes washed. They told me that they had to take the bus 4 or 5 miles from where they live to take care of such needs, having to carry purchases or their clean wash back on the return bus. I pick up a publication, the Los Angeles Sentinel, that was there in boxes on the it was the area's black newspaper, and it was there for free distribution in the neighborhood. I wanted to see the ads, see the job openings, and get a sense of the commerce that went on in the area. It was very depressing to read, and I saw such devastation and apathy. Graffiti were everywhere on the abandoned properties. Most of the street lights had been shot out. In sessions to come, Mark kept reverberating to the particular set of experiences he had endured the first morning of the Faithful Workshop. The visit to South Central gripped him more than any of the other three kinds of hell he had visited. On the third session, after his exposure to the plight of those wretched unfortunates, he announced to me, I had a restless night last night. I was up for a few hours around 2 a.m. I kept thinking what's probably a foolish thought. Here's what I was imagining. I thought that I might rent a hotel suite in some downtown hotel on the south side of downtown, a hotel that was still in a fairly safe neighborhood, but as close as I dared to spend some time alone near South Central. I could put a large ad, a full page ad in the Los Angeles Sentinel. I imagined it would be full page, and I was trying to write it in my head. I would say that I had money to invest in new businesses in an area I would describe. Excuse me. I would name the streets that went about a mile in every direction from the projects. I would say that I'd be willing to review business ideas and would be in residence in suite so and so at such and such a hotel between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on a Sunday I choose. I would invite people to come and make their proposals to me for businesses they thought they were interested in starting. What do you think would happen if I did that? I'm a very good entrepreneur. Maybe I could put my skills to work making some difference in the neighborhood. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I found the announcement Mark was making incredibly moving. Here he was, a man who was self absorbed, driven machine, fine tuned to acquire wealth and without any other purpose. Until this moment, he was a man who had never done a damn thing I could identify to make any contribution to the greater welfare of the world. Yes, he was prepared to indulge the members of his family, but he gave nothing back to anyone or anything beyond his immediate circle. Not a penny for philanthropy, not a shred of energy devoted to any project or cause that might improve the human condition, not by a single scintilla. And here he was being tempted by some inner voice to rise to the challenge of taking on the misery of some of the most suffering humans in our society. I felt myself in the presence of a miracle. Before I formulated an answer to Mark's question, asking for my thoughts, I abandoned him for a few moments. Eric Erickson came to my consciousness again. I remembered his comments about how, in middle years, the developmental challenge that came upon us, as he labeled it, was the tension between what he called generativity versus stagnation. In recent years, Mark had clearly fallen off into a troublesome place of that duality. Maybe, just maybe, his daydream about sponsoring business could at last lead to a burst of generativity after he had repaired his problems with his identity. I then remembered in lecture that I had been given for some time, I had commented on Erickson's description of that midlife challenge, and what was needed in order to secure a good outcome, wending our way successfully through the tension between the two poles of generativity and stagnation. In my presentation, I had often asserted that the end result was vastly influenced by what I described as depending on a successful embrace of what I called social interest versus social withdrawal. For me, social interest involve our exercising our capacity for altruism and actively taking up a concern with the planet and the greater human collective, mankind, as the reference group. Life was best sustained by simply ex, ex, exercise. Oh, those life was best sustained by living out the attempt to try to make some difference. Those who withdrew and simply exercised their egocentrism, as had Mark, were at high risk for floundering at the later stage, generativity versus stagnation. Could I dare to believe that Mark was now formulating an effective path forward, one that would fill in the preceding stages, and as well as one that might challenge the current stage that chronologically he belonged in successfully? I answered Mark's question. I think if you go to the hotel and accept business proposals, you'll have a very rich experience. If you make clear that you have lots of dollars to spend and to invest, I believe many will come. Some will be con artists, trying to find some way to rip you off. Some will be too confused to make any sense. Many will have absolutely impractical ideas. But maybe, just maybe, you might have one or even a few residents of the area who have thought deeply about what could be done and will have something quite interesting to present to you. I would trust you to sort out who is whom. My client wondrously found the courage to proceed with his impossible quest. He did ask me to review the proposed newspaper ad. I tweaked it a little, but his enthusiasm continued to expand, sustained him, and led him to a rich and evocative day and his rented hotel suite. Mark came in to report to me the Tuesday after that fateful Sunday. The magic was continuing. Two of the people he had met had ideas that seemed feasible. One was a middle aged black woman who worked as a cashier in a market miles away, a long bus ride from where she lived. She was very intelligent, seemed quite talented, and had done a very special job as a single mother, watching over a growing son, sustaining him somehow, installing a love of learning in him, and seeing him earn a scholarship to a good university and then leaving home. She told Mark that many fellow women in the community wanted to apply for positions as nannies in wealthy families, or for some civil service job, or some other kinds of white collar jobs. But her peers felt limited and handicapped in showing up for interviews because they lacked dresses to wear that were tasteful, made them look respectable and like viable candidates. She had wandered around in the garment industry in Los Angeles and had identified various lines of clothing that could present the quote right unquote image, and that she thought were producing dresses she could acquire at a modest price, a price low enough for the women of the neighborhood to afford them and yet give her a reasonable profit. She wanted to open a dress store. The man who was the purveyor of the second idea currently worked at close to minimum wage as a security guard on the night shift. He had a permit to carry a gun. The interviewee had two sons who had completed high school and were trying to get jobs that would pay something meaningful. Both of the young men were black belts in karate. The proposal Mark was given was to open a coin laundromat in the neighborhood. The sons would be hired to serve as protectors to those who came to the facility. They would bounce anybody out who threatened to make trouble, as would the aspiring owner himself, who would make it very well known that he was packing heat and would not tolerate any fighting, mischief, vandalism, robbery, or gang conduct on or near his premises. Over the weeks ahead, I had a wonderful opportunity to hear Mark describe what he was doing to make the two dreams of the new business owners come to fruition. He kept giving them homework to do, for example, to do research and find out what equipment would be needed and what the cost of that equipment might be. He explained what a business plan was and sat with them trying to work through all the details, needing to create sensible ones. Uh, he worked with them to do space planning, deciding how many square feet of space would be needed and how that would be laid out. He sent them to explore possible locations, to identify owners or landlords, and to make about what the might cost space. As all unfolded, he took them with him to negotiate leases with potential landlords. And the final touch was to educate his mentees about what a partnership agreement was and how the terms and conditions of their moving forward would play out together. In the end, he made them equal partners with him. He would front the money and they would build the business with their sweat equity. Each would draw a decent salary for running their enterprises. He required no salary for himself. If business is good, there were profits after all expenses were paid, including the salaries that would be decided upon for him. Then he and they would split the very extra windfall of profits equally. As might be expected, there were glitches and delays, but the businesses did open. Mark paid for open houses for food and drink and free gifts for the members of the public who came to explore the new services that were going to be available to them. Slowly, the businesses took root. Slowly, they began to return profits. Along the way, Mark observed how much the ecosystem in which his entrepreneurial efforts was training to evolve affected their destiny. He could see the absence of much police presence, particularly any kind of responsive police presence. It contributed to the general fear. Once in a while, a police cruiser would move slowly down the local avenue, but the residents would hide, fearing that the cops were coming to do something evil rather than something that might be sustaining. The darkness of the streets at night were a problem because the non-functioning street lamps contributed to the ominous atmosphere of danger and evil lurking just somewhere out of sight, and it discouraged people from going out of their homes to do anything, any kind of shopping or getting their clothes washed in the night in the places he had helped open. My client's consciousness kept expanding. He knew he could not sustain his businesses properly unless he did something to change the atmosphere in the neighborhood. Mark then decided to enter the political process at its most crass and basic level. He had always made a six-finger contribution to the Los Angeles Police Protective League and another one to the reelection campaign of the city councilman in whose district his business were situated. He then, that was in his other life. He felt it was a good expenditure of money. He then started a series of conversations with the chief of police and the lieutenant in charge of the local precinct and with the director of the Bureau of Street Lighting. He told the police leaders he would not settle for having a black and white drive through the neighborhood occasionally. He wanted patrolmen out of their cars and walking the sidewalks where his new businesses were located. They were to greet the residents and introduce themselves, and they were to show up on foot frequently. He told the street lighting director that any street light in the neighborhood was to be repaired within 24 hours of its being reported and not functioning. He didn't care if one or another was shot up over and over again. They were to be put back into service and over again. He got the city councilmen whose kind of campaign contributions they coveted from him to deliver the same messages to the director of the street lighting bureau. After finding a partner to start a third business, a hardware store, Mark came in one day preoccupied. You seem deep in thought. What's going on? I asked. I've been thinking. I'm sure Los Angeles isn't unique. I haven't done any real research yet, but it seems more than likely that every large city has an area of blight and terrible poverty. Congratulations, you're awakening from a lifelong slumber, I said to him, and beginning to see and to wonder about all of the world. He said, I think what I've started to do here probably could be done in many other places. There was rioting in Detroit recently. Maybe I could go there and start turning some things around. You are beyond wonderful. You're becoming an inspiration to me. I've been talking to my wife about how much it would mean if she'd come with me. We haven't been close for years. I want her partnership. I think she could be really useful to me. The kids don't need her as much, and there's a chance she could get a kick out of what we would do together. Then I heard more about Mark's marriage than he had shared with me over all the previous months we had been meeting. Once our first son arrived, we haven't been close at all. She has her things she does at home with the children and with friends. She does a lot of shopping and gossiping. I've been preoccupied with my career, my legal difficulties, and my frustration with my having lost my way. We don't talk to each other very much about much of anything that matters. Yes, we do some things together, taking vacations with the kids, going to their parents, visiting some family members, going out or entertaining some other couples, but it's all so superficial. We hardly ever have sex. When I get restless, I don't have sex with my wife. I go to a Korean massage parlor and I have a hand job. Ah, that's sad and lonely, I said, yeah. But it doesn't surprise me. If communicative intimacy is not sustained, then sexual intimacy begins to decay too. You've come up with a great idea there, though. If you and she had a project to share that captured parts of your passion for both of you, your sexual aliveness with each other might begin to rekindle. And Offmark went to other cities, often accompanied by his wife. He seeded businesses in 6 more locations in the United States. Slowly, his new preoccupations and his travel schedule kept him away from me more and more, and our weekly visits began to dwindle. As his older of his businesses became solid and well regulated, he ended his partnerships with the indigenous members of the communities he was serving, deeding his partnership interest fully over to his partners. You see, somehow he had discovered he didn't need the profits, he needed only the joy of creation and the feeling that his efforts mattered. After a while, he left me completely. His parents were getting really frail. He moved his family to suburban New Jersey, purchasing a lovely estate not too far from the George Washington Bridge, so he could visit frequently with his mother and father. I would get occasional messages from him about life being good and about a growing sense of involvement with his wife and even his children as his children moved towards their oncoming emancipation. I have had no further word from him for several years now. I've saved the best for last, though. From the day that Mark returned from his moratorium at Point Reyes, he never again mentioned his back or backaches. He didn't bring the topic up. I didn't bring it up. I am certain that having engaged with life in a different way, having found his purpose, having forged a very different identity, his back no longer had to keep sounding its alarm. But I never said, I told you so. I needed to give him a quiet space to savor his own triumph and not vie with him in any way in a contest over taking credit. What was the purpose he found? It was wonderfully apt. It was one that allowed him to capitalize on many parts of his old acquisitive entrepreneurial identity, but now expand that identity to incorporate compassion and altruism into what had been a life of pomposity and selfishness. He did indeed become as an Elziard Bouffier, going to places of light and creating the beginnings of some gardens for the benefits of those who would walk by. At the same time, he impressed me by his surprising openness to engage. I have long thought it is not insight, nor the result of the teachings of others, that opens the possibility of transformation and enlightenment for us. It is our ability to dream dreams and then our courageous willingness to risk pursuing them and embracing the experiences that flow from them. that alters and ennobles us. We are in the end made different by the streaming of our engagements with and the possibilities of life much more than our ruminating over attempts to make sense of ourselves. Mark was very courageous in his willingness to experiment with what was new, what was possible, and to turn them into experiences he was going to savor. Along the way, in my sense of him, he metamorphosed from a person whose life offended me into one whose life became inspirational. All right. I will stop here because we're almost out of time rather than going on to something else. I can foreshadow what I'm going to do. Identity formation in its beginning stages and in its beginning way of coalescing takes place while the child is still living at home under the tutelage of parents. So I'm going to turn to something next week called good enough parenting. The British School of Psychoanalysis, some of its members have prided themselves on studying parenting and the impact of parenting on child development. Margaret Muller is one of the leaders of that movement, and she tried to talk to the lay public as well about parenting. And she tried to reassure us. She said, we don't have to be perfect parents. We only have to do what she called good enough parenting for every stage of human development, while a subject is struggling to become and to master the challenges of the stage, that's usually done in some continuing interaction with parents. So I will talk about stage 5 next week. I'll show you the chart of good enough parenting, and I will talk about what good enough parenting is as children move from pubescence through their adolescence to emancipation and the beginning coalescence of their identity. What do they need their parents to do, and what do they need their parents not to do? So, on that note, I will stop lecturing and I will listen.
Arthur, I was very interested in your process as Mark's therapist.
So was I.
How did you possibly come up with the journey that Mark set out to do? And you then doubled down on the wager. And then how did you come up with the mystical nonsense that you prescribed to him?
Nonsense. How dare you, Scott?
Well, I'm using his words.
When I'm getting closer to stories about my recent life, well, I'll do some foreshadowing here. One of the things I've done is to try and throw away any hay book as fully as possible. Uh, I have studied many things. I've learned many things. I've had many life experiences of my own. I've had a ton of experience with more than 2,000 clients. In me is the residue of all of that. So I just simply show up. I ask my client, what is it that he or she thinks we need to pay attention to? And I start a conversation. And in that conversation, I will get there later. There are 4 screens of things that I'm paying attention to. I don't mean to. It's like being a TV producer. The screens are there and things start showing up on them. The central screen, of course, is looking at the client and monitoring and having whatever is my conversation with the client, seeing where the conversation is going. But one of the other things are the kinds of things that are arising out of what I think I should call my intuition. They just come to me. And instead of ignoring them or throwing them away, I just announce them. That's all. If they've come to me, I should talk about it. So I share what's come to me with my client. I trust myself to be my own instrument somehow.
I don't think you have much choice.
Yes, I can start searching for. I read a book about this once. What did the author of that book say I should do at this point? I should abdicate myself and look for somebody else's self who has encountered something like this. By the
Mhm.
way, that's one of the screens they're playing. I do get fragments of things I read in books. I do remember lectures I've heard. I do remember classes I've
You know, you provided for Mark is a course in urban planning. You
taken.
provided the whole
No, he provided it for himself. He discovered that's what he needed to do in order for the entrepreneurial part of himself to get scratched properly by what was going on.
but you were guiding him for this course. It was like you were encouraging it. You were almost excited by it as
Yeah,
well.
I was. I thought he was moving in wonderful directions. Of course, if he's going to do something in that neighborhood, he has to worry about what the quality of life is in the whole neighborhood, just not in the stores that he's creating.
Mhm.
He has to make it safe for people to go to those stores. Not going to turn off it if he doesn't have a big volume of business going on.
Yeah, it seemed to me that in the end, you were asking him to go on a hero's journey.
Yes,
Yeah, that oftentimes people live kind of mundane lives, simple lives that aren't like the movies we all like to see. You know.
absolutely. Joseph Campbell is quite right. The hero's journey is the template by which important life change takes place. You get out of doing rhythmically, mechanically, and with a kind of even a certainty or even an uncertainty, doing the same things over and over and over and over again, and somehow suffering and thinking something needs to be done to your life to bring some new vitality in it. You have to go out and start doing different things than you've ever done before.
So
Yes.
Arthur, you've got a couple sentences to answer this easy question. What's your life's purpose?
What's my life's purpose? Unfortunately, it's a very painful one for me. My life's purpose is to matter. To matter to other humans. It's
Yeah,
very
that's,
driven. It's obsessive.
mhm.
Hmm.
I hope
Matter in it.
I hope I change it before I'm done.
Well, I don't know. I think it's been quite beneficial to society and humanity as a whole.
It's been beneficial to me too, but it's
Yeah.
so driven. I do it too much. I don't make room for other things enough.
But it's your lifeblood.
Yeah.
It's
At this moment, I'm
yeah.
not sure it's going to last me for the rest of my life
Why not?
because that's the only constant, change.
Hmm.
Oh, I know there's one coming. I hope it's I can keep the madness going for a while. The last one that's coming is making peace with dying. To die without fear, or panic, or regret.
Hmm.
Hmm. It's a big one.
I don't want to explore it yet.
Well, I'm gonna let you take the lead on that one.
I'm likely to be a person that takes the lead for you. I'm significantly older than you are.
Yeah.
Is that going to be our last hour or?
No, I don't. I think I'll run out of things to talk about before I arrive at that point. Oh, by the
Uh,
way, this whole project is a way where I can hope to expand at least a little bit the number of people to whom I matter.
yeah. Well, you matter to me, Arthur.
Thank you.
Same here.
Oh, I'll make one promise. I did this to my wife. I do it to my students sometime. I'll do it to you guys. I will never be boring.
Very good.
That
We
that
can see that.
that's the only terrible sin is to be boring. All
Quite
right,
true.
guys. I'll be back with you again next week.
All right. Good
Okay. All
night.
right. Have a good
All right.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
See ya.